Good morning and welcome to The Art of Composition. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. I wanted to do a follow-up video lecture on my lens culture review of the winners, finalists, and so on. I have selected what I think, in my professional opinion on design, what I think is the greatest photograph out of all of them. And I had mentioned before in my other video lecture that I'll simply say that from a fine art print point of view, meaning value rendition and the qualities of a good black and white print, this one is stunning. But I want to go a little bit deeper than that and talk about some of the compositional elements of this photograph that will help the photographer learn how to select better photographs for their own portfolio. So let me just point out a few things about this that stand out to me. The first thing that I notice is that you have a dominant vertical, a dominant horizontal, and a dominant diagonal line in this composition. And if I bring this image down small, and I recommend this when you're reviewing your own work, I can bring this photograph down to the size of a thumbnail or a postage stamp, and you can see the divisions, the composition clearly. And this is a good quality of a good design photograph. If you can bring your image down to the size of a thumbnail and it still looks good compositionally speaking, chances are you have a winner. Ken Rockwell mentioned this in an article that he had written when it came time to review photographs for a contest. And what he did was he brought all his images, all the entries down to the size that you see on my screen, and he scanned through them and pulled out the best ones. I do this when I'm looking at my own work and when I'm judging others as well, but it's the starting point to see if you have a good design. But let me bring this back up and I'm going to point out a few other things. You have a dominant vertical, a dominant horizontal, and a dominant diagonal line here. And this is where they fall. Your vertical is here. You have a dominant horizontal line right here. And then you have a dominant diagonal line. And what I'm going to do is draw out the 14 line armature and show you how some of these elements are locking into place. When it comes to photography, I had mentioned this before in a video lecture. Photography is very different than drawing and painting. The end result of a drawing and painting doesn't look like a photograph. However, there are certain elements that relate. In a drawing and painting, the relationship is within composition, not how the image is rendered. That in itself is the most direct correlation between a drawing, painting, and a photograph. But aside from these three lines, let me point out here too that your subject here is framed within, let me draw this out here. You have your subject framed within these elements that surround it right here. You have these rocks that are framing it almost as a doorway, this subject, and it reads clearly. You have great figure-ground relationship, light on dark. The subject reads clearly against its background. It's framed in nicely here. There's nothing confusing about these overlaps. It's interesting here too that this person is holding a bottle. If this bottle was positioned anywhere else on his face, if it was moved over to the left, it wouldn't work. But the fact is, you can read this area here clearly within these shapes in here. And like I just said, if this bottle was moved to the left, it would not be as good as a photograph as it is, because this could have been a potential problem. But the way the overlapping is happening within this photograph, it works. It's a beautiful photograph. And like I said, I think it's the best one out of the group. But let me draw the 14 line grid on it to show the photographer how some of these elements fall into place. And let me thin up this line a little bit. All right. The reason I do this, if you're a photographer that has come across my website for the first time, you don't have to do this with every photograph, but the reason I drop the armature down on some of these is to demonstrate what makes a strong composition, whether it's a drawing, painting, or photograph, it doesn't matter. There are certain elements that make a drawing, painting, or photograph a work of art. Kenyon Cox once said, without design, there may be representation, but there can be no art. You can read about that in the book, The Classic Point of View. You can find it for free on archive.org. I think it's chapter 2 on design. What he's saying is that without design, you can represent your subject. For example, if you're drawing an apple, you can demonstrate that it's an apple, but without design, it's not art. And it's a very blunt point, but the truth is that's what my website is based on. And I fully stand by that comment. Without design, there can't be art. It doesn't exist. So that's why I always stress that point. Check out the book, though. It's called The Classic Point of View. And like I said, I believe it's chapter 2. It's on design. It's a great read. And I think I have some of it in my user's guide when I'm talking about Kenyon Cox. You might as well download it. It's a free book. I haven't read all the other chapters in that book. I pretty much focused in on design, so it's worth a read. But anyway, when I just drop a few of these lines, I'm just going to point this out. You have gazing direction here. This figure, they're looking down. It's following this diagonal line. But at the same time, that gazing direction is picking up the coincidence in the angle in this man's arm. So you have a coincidence of line. Your eye travels down and it's met in this area with this diagonal line. In this diagonal line right here, it's following the angle in the hand. And you have a horizontal division that falls right under the chin. But let me continue on. And I know there's photographers out there that go, well, what's the point of doing this after you've taken a photograph? The point is you want to learn what a good photograph is. You don't have to do this with everything, but it's important. And the other thing is too, there's a lot of information online that talks about dynamic symmetry, but dynamic symmetry is not the only way to evaluate art. For example, when I drop this diagonal line here, notice how it's following the angle in the figure, and it's meeting this point here. You have an eye. This is a critical point in the photograph. Right here, the hand. So where those eyes fall, it does matter. And I just have a few more lines here, but when I drop this line, it encloses this part of the figure. Things lock into place in this diagonal line here. It runs along the man's chin. This is surrounding the bottle. It's just a really good photograph. But with that said, the grid's drawn out. I could drop a few lines. I said this was your dominant vertical line. Well, this vertical falls within these intersecting diagonal lines right there. So I can bring that up. There's my dominant vertical. Now I have my dominant horizontal line right here, which is falling in that same eye, but it's going horizontally. And then this is your dominant diagonal line. And let me just eliminate a few of these lines to make this a little bit more clear. I'm just trying to figure out what I want to take out here. I think, if I drop a vertical here though as well, I just noticed this. It gives me this edge of this rock right there. And I'll bring that to there where that intersection is. This is how you evaluate a good photograph. Now, like I said, you could say, well, it's good and I know it. It's important to understand what you're doing and why it's a good photograph. I hope this helps. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it as always.